My name is Vicky Williams, 40 years old. On my first night in the beach house I bought with 11 years of my own money, my mother called. "Pack the master bedroom. Your sister has a real family. You don't." My father took the phone. "You're childless. 4 bedrooms for a woman with no one is selfish and wasteful." My sister texted 30 seconds later. "Truck at 10. Don't make this awkward. Just clear out." I looked down the hall at 2 small rooms already painted, already waiting, and I typed back 3 words. 10 is perfect. They thought they were driving 3 hours to empty a house that belonged to a lonely, childless woman who always gave in. They had no idea what was already standing inside that house, or who would be waiting when their truck turned onto my street at 9:55. What happened the next morning is something my family will spend the rest of their lives trying and failing to explain. Before I show you exactly how their entire story about me collapsed in my driveway, hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. The phone was still warm in my hand when I set it face down on the kitchen island of a house they were already dividing up in their heads. I didn't slam anything. I didn't call anyone back. I stood there in a kitchen that still smelled like fresh paint and let the ocean do the talking through the open window. The tide was coming in. You can hear it in that house if everything else is quiet, a slow breath in and out, like the whole place is patient in a way I'm still learning to be. People think calm means you didn't feel it. Calm is just what's left when you've felt something so many times it stops surprising you. My mother telling me my sister deserved my bedroom didn't surprise me. My father deciding that a woman without children takes up too much room in the world didn't surprise me either. What surprised me, a little, was how good it felt to write 10 is perfect and mean it completely. I read the messages again, the way you reread a bill you already know the total of. My mother's voicemail I played twice. 4 seconds. "Pack the master bedroom, Vicky. Your sister has a real family. You don't." She had a gift for saying the cruelest thing in the calmest voice, so that if you ever repeated it back to her, she could look wounded and tell you she'd never say such a thing. You must have misheard. I'd been mishearing her my whole life, apparently. Then Kristen's text, which she'd sent 30 seconds after our father hung up, as if they'd all been on a call together working out the logistics of a house that wasn't theirs. "Truck at 10. Don't make this awkward. Just clear out." 3 sentences. No hello, no question mark. My sister doesn't ask questions when she's already decided the answer. I want to be honest about what I did in that first hour, because it's the truest picture of who I'd become by then. I didn't cry and I didn't rage. I walked the house. I checked that the back door was locked. I checked that the windows were latched. I ran my thumb over the new deadbolt on the front door, the one I'd had installed the week I closed, because some part of me had known, even before the phone rang, that this family treats a lock as a suggestion. I stood at the end of the hall in front of 2 closed doors and put my hand on one of the doorknobs, cool under my palm, and I didn't open it. Not yet, I told myself, not tonight. I thought, standing there, about how many versions of this night I'd already lived. The one where I begged them to see me. The one where I gave in and told myself it was easier. The one where I screamed and they got to call me unstable and be right about it in front of everyone. I'd played all of those out over 30 years and none of them had ever worked, because they were all arguments, and you cannot win an argument with people who own the scoreboard. So I wasn't going to have an argument, I was going to have a morning, and the morning was already set. Then I went back to the kitchen and did the only thing that made sense. I made coffee I wouldn't drink until morning, set out 2 mugs, and looked at the calendar on my phone where, at 10 o'clock the next day, one line had been sitting for a week. Home visit, D. Prescott, 10:00 a.m., 10 o'clock, for both of them. Let me back up, because if I only tell you about the truck, you'll think this was one bad morning. It wasn't. It was 30 years arriving on schedule. To understand why I bought a house with 4 bedrooms, when everyone in my family assumed I needed none, you have to understand how I got the money, and why the money was the part they could never forgive. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner. I take care of sick kids. I've spent most of my adult life doing it, and for a stretch of years in my early 30s, I did it as a travel nurse, moving from contract to contract, from one short-staffed hospital to the next, working crisis rates during years when the country was desperate for people who could walk into a pediatric unit and not fall apart. The pay in those years was unreal, and I treated every dollar of it like it was radioactive. I lived in furnished rentals with other people's art on the walls. I ate a lot of gas station dinners in hospital parking lots. And I put almost everything into an account I refused to touch. I didn't do it for a beach house. Honestly, for years I didn't know what I was saving for. I only knew that I never again wanted to be in a position where the shape of my life depended on someone in my family deciding I deserved help. I'd been in that position once, badly, and I'll get to it, because it's the center of everything. But the habit started there. Save enough, and no one gets a vote on your life. 11 years of that. 11 years of double shifts and holiday differentials, and telling friends I couldn't make the trip, the wedding, the girls' weekend, because I was working. When I finally bought the house in Emerald Isle, I put $190,000 down on a $625,000 home. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, second row from the water, close enough to smell the salt, and far enough back that the flood insurance didn't bankrupt me. That last part matters more than it sounds. On the coast, the insurance is a second mortgage all by itself. Wind coverage, flood coverage, the whole ugly stack of it renewing every year. My payment, all in, runs close to $3,800 a month, and I carry it alone, on one salary, with nobody standing behind me if a month goes wrong. I didn't inherit that house. I earned it, one long shift at a time. The only thing my family ever gave me was a reason to save. Here's the part they'd tell you, if they were honest, which they aren't. In their version, I owe them. Not a specific debt, a general one. The kind that never gets smaller no matter how much you pay into it. I could give you 100 examples, but one will do, because it's the one that taught me the rules. 8 years ago, Kristen got herself into a hole with a car she couldn't afford, and my mother called me at work. I was on a contract in another state, and told me, not asked, that I'd be covering the difference so my sister didn't lose the car and, quote, embarrass the family. It was $9,000. I sent it. I told myself it was a loan. Everyone in that conversation understood it was not a loan. Nobody ever mentioned it again, except once, at a holiday, when my mother told a cousin what a wonderful thing my parents had done, helping Kristen keep her car through a hard time. My money, their generosity. My name erased from the story entirely. That's the machine. I put money and effort into one end, and out the other end came a story about how much the family had done for Kristen, and the story never once had my name in it. For years I believed that if I gave enough, eventually I'd earn a place in the center of the frame. It took me a long time to understand that the center was the whole point of keeping me on the edge. The other thing they'd never say out loud is where they thought they got the right to just walk into my house. That has a history too. Years ago, when my parents hit a rough patch, I let them stay in a condo I was renting while I was away on a contract. I gave them a key. That was the mistake. Not the staying, the key. Because in my family, once you've handed someone a key, you've apparently handed them a permanent share of everything you will ever own. They stayed 4 months, rearranged my furniture, gave the spare key to Kristen just in case. And when I finally came home and asked for the keys back, my mother acted as if I'd accused her of a crime. "We're family, Vicky," she said. "Why are you being like this about a key?" I never gave anyone a key to the beach house. I changed the locks the week I moved in. But you can't change the lock on a belief. In their minds, my spaces had always been common property, and no deed was going to convince them otherwise. They didn't need a key to my house. They had something they trusted more. They had 30 years of me giving in. And there was one more thing feeding it, older and quieter than the money. My grandmother. My mother's mother, Ruth. When Ruth died in 2019, she left me a small amount of money, enough to matter to a younger version of me, but nothing that built this house. What she really left me had no resale value at all. A tide clock, a recipe box in her handwriting, and a children's book with a lighthouse on the cover, so worn the corners had gone soft as cloth. I should tell you about the book, because it isn't really about the book. When I was small and the house was loud with everyone arranging themselves around Kristen, Ruth used to take me into the back bedroom, where it was quiet, and read me the same story, the little lighthouse that thinks it's too small to matter. I didn't understand then why she read it to me specifically, the girl at the edge of the frame, and not to the one everyone photographed. I understand now. She was telling me something she couldn't say out loud in that family, which was that being small and steady and easy to overlook was not the same as being worth less. I kept that book through 11 moves and 11 years. It was the only thing I never put in storage. My mother has never forgiven me for the will, but the will was the least of it. What my mother could never forgive was that in her last years, Ruth stopped pretending. She'd say it right at the dinner table in front of everyone. Vicky's the one who calls me. Vicky's the one who comes. She trusted me, out loud, in a family where trust was currency, and she spent it on me instead of on her own daughter. My mother turned that into a grievance she carries to this day like an unpaid invoice. Mom always favored you, she texted me the week I closed on the house. The first thing she said when she heard. The least you can do is share what she gave you. That belief, that anything good that ever came to me came at the family's expense, and the family is owed a refund, is the whole story. Everything my parents did on the phone that night grew out of it. The house was never mine to them. It was a family asset I happened to be holding, and Kristen had a real family, and I did not, so the math was obvious. Give the childless one's house to the one with children. To them, it wasn't cruelty. It was accounting. If you've ever been the one your family decided was strong enough to go without, I already know how tired you are. Tell me in the comments what they said to you. I read every one. You need to meet my sister properly, because it's easy to make Kristen a villain, and she isn't exactly one. She's something more ordinary and more useful to my parents than a villain. She's a person who has never once had to ask whether she deserved a thing before taking it. Kristen is 36, 4 years younger than me. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and a husband named Todd, who I never knew well and never disliked. She has what my mother calls, with no irony at all, a real life, and she's been the center of the family photograph since the day she was born. When Kristen wanted to go to college out of state, my parents found the money. When her first apartment fell through, they covered the gap. When she and Todd bought their first house, my father co-signed the loan, and my mother furnished half of it with things she found deals on, which is family code for things she bought and never mentioned the price of again. Kristen's wants were treated as emergencies. Mine were treated as extravagances. I was the resource, the strong one. That was always the word. Vicky's the strong one. It sounds like a compliment until you understand it's a job title. The strong one is the one you don't have to worry about, which becomes the one you never do worry about, which becomes the one who gets nothing because she can obviously manage. And I could manage. That was the trap. Every time I managed, they took it as proof I'd never needed anything to begin with. There's a photograph from my parents' 30th anniversary that I kept for years without understanding why. Everyone's arranged on the couch, Kristen and Todd and the kids in the center, my parents standing behind them with their hands resting on my sister's shoulders. I'm at the far edge of the frame, half cut off, the way you end up when you're the one who offered to take the picture, and then somebody said, "Just get in, quick," and the shutter went before you'd found your place. That's my entire childhood in one image. The center, and the person holding it together from the edge, slightly out of frame. The story of why I was single, why I had no children, changed depending on who was in the room. To relatives, I was married to my career. To their friends, I was too picky, too independent, a shame, really. To my face, on a bad day, I was cold. My mother said it more than once, in that light voice she saves for cruelty, so it sounds like concern. It's different when you have kids, Vic, Kristen told me once, when I pushed back on something, and she wasn't even being mean. That was the frightening part. She genuinely believed I lived in a smaller category of person, one whose needs were lighter, whose home was emptier, whose objections mattered less, because I hadn't done the one thing that made a woman's life count in my family's ledger. I never corrected any of it. There was a reason. The truth about why I don't have children is not a truth they earned, and I wasn't going to hand it to people who'd only use it as more evidence. I'll tell you, though, you're not them. There was a whole person my family erased, and to explain her, I have to explain the year I lost almost everything at once. My grandmother had two daughters, my mother and my Aunt Carol. Carol was the one who married wrong, moved away, struggled with money, the daughter who didn't fit the picture, and in a family that cared about the picture more than the people in it, Carol became a name you didn't say. "We don't talk about that side of the family," my father would announce, and reach for the remote, and that was the end of it. Carol had a daughter, my cousin. Her name was Amanda, and I was the only one who ever kept saying it. In 2011, I lost a pregnancy. I won't dress it up for you. It was early, and it was quiet, and I told almost no one, and the missing of it went into me somewhere deep and stayed. My family folded it into their theory that I'd simply chosen a life without children, because a choice was easier for them to file than a loss. Nobody sat with me. Nobody asked. In the same stretch of months, my Aunt Carol died, and Amanda, who was 15, needed somewhere to go. I was 26. I was grieving something I couldn't say out loud in that family. And I wanted, with everything left in me, to take Amanda in. I almost did. That's the part that still finds me at night. I was so close. I met with the county caseworker. I was a blood relative. I had steady work. I had a spare room. I did more than talk about it. I got the room ready. I painted it. I bought a bed and a lamp and left a stuffed animal on the pillow because I didn't know what a 15-year-old would want, and I panicked. I prepared a home for a child once before, 12 years before I did it again, and almost no one ever knew. And then my parents got involved, and my parents did the thing they do best. They managed it. My mother told the caseworker I was grieving and unstable. She said it kindly, in the cardigan voice, which is what makes it lethal, because it sounds so reasonable coming from a composed woman who dabs her eyes at the right moment. She said the family would handle Amanda themselves. She said a teenager needed to stay near her grandmother, not go to a single woman who was going through something. She said a lot of true-sounding things built to protect one lie, which was that the family had any intention of stepping up at all. I have the sentence in her own handwriting. I didn't always. For years I only had the feeling of it, the sense that something had been said about me in a room I wasn't in, the way you can tell a conversation stopped when you walked up because the air changes. It wasn't until a few years ago, after Ruth died, and I started pulling on the loose threads of my own history, that I learned you can request your own records. So I did. A thin envelope came in the mail weeks later, and I opened it standing at my kitchen counter in the condo, and I read my mother's statement for the first time, folded into four and gone yellow at the creases. "My daughter is grieving and unstable," it reads. "She cannot raise a child right now. We will handle it ourselves." I read it 3 times. Then I put it down, and I sat at the counter for a long while, not doing anything, and I understood something I'd spent a decade not letting myself understand. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It hadn't been my mother being overwhelmed and saying the wrong thing in a hard moment. It had been a decision, made in ink, signed. She'd looked at the worst year of my life and used it as a tool. I folded the paper back along its creases and I kept it, not because I had a plan for it, but because it was the first piece of proof I'd ever held that the thing I felt had actually happened. They didn't handle it. That was never the plan. The plan was to keep me from connecting myself to Carol's side of the family, to the name they'd worked so hard to bury, and once I'd stepped back, because I did step back, because I was 26 and hollowed out and no match that year for my own mother's certainty, they let Amanda go into the system, to strangers. And then they returned to their lives and never said her name again. They didn't just take a house from me later. They took a daughter from me first. I found Amanda when I could, over the years. It wasn't easy. Kids who age out of foster care with no family behind them tend to move a lot, and she did. She aged out at 18, with no one standing on the other side of it, which is a sentence disguised as a birthday. But I'd track her down every so often, meet her for coffee, slip her whatever I could without making it a thing. Once, when she was in her early 20s, we sat in a diner and she asked me, out of nowhere, whether I remembered reading to her when she was little. I did. From that lighthouse book, my grandmother's book, the only book anyone ever read to me twice. I'd read it to Amanda in the years I still had access, because I wanted her to have one steady thing in a life that kept moving the ground under her. I still think about the lighthouse, she told me in that diner. The little one. The one that thought it was too small to matter. She stirred her coffee and didn't look up. If I ever have kids, I want them to have stuff like that. Steady stuff. I told her she would. I believed it when I said it. That's the part I can't get all the way past. Amanda had 2 children, a daughter and a son, and in the fall of 2025, on a wet road at night, she died in a car accident. She was 28 years old. I found out on a Tuesday. A cousin I barely spoke to called me, the kind of call you know is bad before you answer, because that cousin has never once called you. She told me Amanda had been in an accident on a wet road, that it had been quick, that there was going to be a small service that half the family wouldn't come to. I remember I was still in my scrubs, just off a shift, and I sat down in my car in the hospital parking lot and didn't turn the key for a long time. 28. She was 28. I kept thinking about the diner, and the lighthouse, and the things she'd said about wanting her kids to have steady stuff. The news reached my parents too. These things travel through relatives even in families that pretend certain people don't exist. My mother relayed my father's reaction to me almost as an aside, the way you mention the weather. "That's not really our problem, is it?" he'd said. I went to the service. It was small, in a rented room with folding chairs, and I counted maybe a dozen people, none of them my parents, none of them Kristen. There were flowers from people who'd known the grown-up Amanda, the one my family never met, and a photograph of her on an easel that I hadn't seen before. A woman with tired eyes and a real smile, holding 2 small children I didn't yet know were about to become the center of my life. I stood at the back. I didn't know then that her son would be brought to my unit in 3 months, or that I would read the wristband 3 times. I only knew that the family that talked constantly about family had not sent 1 chair's worth of itself to say goodbye to one of its own. Amanda's 2 children went into foster care. No one on that side of the family stepped forward. No one on our side even asked their names. So I stopped asking my family for anything at all, and I started very quietly to prepare. I want to tell you how I found them, because it wasn't a plan I could have made. It was a night shift. In January of this year, they brought a 5-year-old boy up to my unit in respiratory distress, an asthma flare that had frightened everyone at home badly enough to call an ambulance. I did my job. I got his oxygen where I wanted it, got the medication working, got the fear out of the room, and then I sat with him the way you do when a small person is scared and the people who love him aren't there. He watched me the whole time with these serious dark eyes, taking my measure. And after a while he asked me a question I still hear in quiet moments. "Are you staying till my sister comes back?" His wristband said, "Read, Owen. I have taken care of thousands of children. I have read thousands of wristbands. I read that one 3 times. Read, Owen Reed, 5 years old. And somewhere in the building, a sister. I did what you're supposed to do the moment you suspect a patient might be your own blood. I told the charge nurse, a steady woman named Maureen, who'd worked more night shifts than anyone alive, and I told the unit social worker, and I stepped back from being his direct provider so there could never be a question of a line crossed. That disclosure is the reason everything after it was possible, because it put me on the record as a relative before I ever asked for a single thing. But nobody could stop me from walking past the family waiting room on my break, and I didn't try to stop myself. There was a girl in there, 8 years old, thin, alone on a vinyl chair with her feet not quite reaching the floor. She had a library book in her lap, the paperback kind in the clear plastic sleeve, and she was holding it with both hands like it might be taken. A caseworker sat beside her, scrolling a phone, kind enough but tired, the way they all are, because there are never enough of them. 2 siblings, split for one night between a hospital bed and a stranger's supervision. Temporary placement. That's the phrase, temporary, which for a kid can mean anything. I confirmed it later in the boy's chart, though my body already knew. Mother, deceased. Amanda Reed. I hadn't heard that name out loud in years. My family had made sure of it, which meant the children my family called strangers, the children no one had asked about, were the last of that whole buried branch. Amanda's kids, Carol's grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the grandmother who read me the Lighthouse book. The last living line of the family everyone had agreed didn't exist. Maureen found me in the break room around 4 in the morning. I must have looked like something because she didn't say anything at first, just set a cup of the terrible unit coffee in front of me and waited. When I told her, not all of it, just that the little boy in bed 6 was my cousin's son, and my cousin was dead, and no one in my family had so much as asked the children's names, she was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" she said. "Not what should you do, what are you going to?" "I don't know yet," I said. But I did. I think I'd known since I read the wristband the second time. I stood in a hospital hallway that night and did the arithmetic of my own life for a different reason than usual. I was 40. Good income, no debt, and 11 years of savings, sitting in an account whose purpose I had never once been able to name. I had a spare room in a rented condo and no earthly idea how to fold 2 children into it. By the time my break ended, I had a real estate app open on my phone, and I was looking at houses with more than one bedroom on the coast where the schools were decent and the air was clean, and a boy with bad lungs could fall asleep to the ocean instead of a highway. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I sat at my kitchen table in the condo with a cold cup of coffee and I made a list, because a list is what I do when a thing is too big to hold all at once. What I'd need, what the county would ask, who I'd have to become on paper to be allowed to become it in life. Then I called the caseworker's office the moment it opened and said the sentence that started everything, the sentence no one in my family had ever once said about those children. I said, "I'm a relative, and I want to be considered." The woman on the phone asked how I was related, and I told her. And there was a pause, and she said carefully that relative placements were preferred, but that the process was thorough. I told her I was counting on thorough. Thorough was the only thing that had ever protected me from my own family. And it was going to be the thing that protected Amanda's kids too. To bring them home, though, I was going to have to walk straight back into the one thing my parents had done to me that I'd never told a soul. Because the county was going to spend months asking me, in 100 careful ways, whether I was fit to raise a child. And the last time anyone asked that question about me, my own mother had answered it in writing, and her answer had been no. Stepping forward was harder than people think. I wasn't a parent. I wasn't a sibling or a grandparent. I was a cousin, once removed by the kind of distance my own family had spent years enforcing, and to a system that has learned to be careful. A cousin who appears out of nowhere is a question, not an answer. I had to prove the relationship I was raised to hide. I dug up old family records, a photograph of Ruth holding both Amanda and me as small children, my own account of the years I'd kept finding Amanda when no one else would. I disclosed up front that I was the pediatric provider who'd first recognized Owen, and why I'd stepped back the moment I did. I did everything by the book, because the book was the only thing standing between 2 children and another year of strangers, and because I already knew what happens when my family gets to write the story instead of the record. I met the kids properly a few weeks later, once the paperwork allowed it, in a supervised visit at a family services office that smelled like carpet cleaner and old crayons. I'd been told not to expect much. Kids who've lost a parent and been passed between placements don't hand out their trust, and they shouldn't. Owen remembered me from the hospital and warmed up in about 10 minutes, which the caseworker said was fast. He'd decided I was the person who fixed the breathing, and to a 5-year-old that's close to magic. Lily was the wall, 8 years old, watching every exit, answering questions in the fewest words that would end them. She'd been the one holding things together. I recognized it in the first 5 minutes, the way you recognize your own handwriting on an old envelope. She'd been the strong one since the night their mother didn't come home. Somebody had made her that, the same way somebody made me that, and I wanted to reach across the table and tell her she could put it down now. I didn't, because it wasn't true yet. What broke the wall, a little, was the book. I'd brought it, my grandmother's lighthouse book, half on instinct. When Owen got restless, I opened it and started reading. Quiet, not performing, just reading. And about a page in, I felt Lily go still. Not warm, still. Listening in spite of herself. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Our mom had one kind of like that." And I said, "I know, I gave it to her." And Lily's face did something complicated I won't pretend I fully understood, and the caseworker made a note, and that was the first thread. There were more visits after that, each one a little longer, a little less supervised. On the third one, I took them to a park near the water, with the caseworker trailing at a polite distance, and Owen ran too hard and started to wheeze, and I saw the exact moment Lily's whole body braced for the emergency she'd clearly handled before, alone, too many times. I got down to Owen's level, walked him through the breathing the way I'd done in the hospital, got him settled in under a minute, and when I looked up, Lily was staring at me like I'd done something impossible. It wasn't that I'd helped him, it was that she hadn't had to. I watched a small piece of the weight come off an 8-year-old's shoulders, and I understood that whatever it cost me, I was going to spend the rest of my life taking that weight. That was the day I stopped thinking of it as something I hoped might happen and started thinking of it as something I was going to make happen. I bought the house in April. I closed on it in the middle of the month. The realtor thought I was strange, a single woman looking at 4-bedroom houses, walking through them checking sight lines and stair safety and how far the nearest pediatric care was, asking about the schools with an intensity that didn't match my ring finger. I found this one and I knew. It wasn't the biggest or the newest, but it had 2 bedrooms down one hall that caught good light, and from the upstairs window, past the second row of houses, you could just see the lighthouse out on the point, and when I saw that I stopped pretending I was still shopping. I spent every day off after closing with a roller in my hand, turning 2 of those 4 bedrooms into rooms a child would actually want to sleep in. One with a star lamp, for the boy who'd been afraid in the dark of a hospital. One with a window seat, for the girl who liked to watch the exits, so she'd have somewhere to watch the water instead. I made 2 little wooden signs with their names burned into them, Lily and Owen, and I set them on a shelf and didn't hang them, because I'd hung hope on a door once before, 12 years ago, and had it taken down, and I wasn't going to do that to myself again until the county said the word. Here is where I have to tell you about the weeks before that phone call, because the family didn't arrive out of nowhere. They arrive the way weather arrives, building for days where you can see it if you're watching. They found out I'd bought the house the way they find out everything, through the relatives, and the news that I'd bought a 4-bedroom place on the water landed in my mother like a provocation. The first text was almost friendly. "We heard the wonderful news. We should all come see it." I knew what "we should all come see it" meant. It meant an inspection. It meant evaluation. It meant my mother standing in my living room deciding what the family's share of my good fortune was going to be. Then Kristen called, and she didn't bother with friendly. "Mom says you got a 4-bedroom, she said. "That's insane for one person, Vic. You know Todd and I have been looking for a bigger place, and the kids need the beach. It's good for them." She said it the way you'd remind someone of an appointment they'd forgotten. Not a request. A reminder of an arrangement I hadn't agreed to. I told her evenly that the house wasn't available. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Available," she repeated. "It's family, Vic. Don't be weird about it. Don't be weird about it." The same phrase my mother used about the key. In my family, having a boundary is a personality flaw, and the word for it is weird. 3 days later, Kristen showed up unannounced. I wasn't home, I was on a visit with the kids, but a neighbor mentioned a woman had been walking around the outside of my house, looking in the windows, pacing off the rooms from the yard like she was measuring for furniture. When I confronted her by phone, she didn't even deny it. "I was just seeing what we're working with," she said. "We." She was already thinking in we. I could have ended it right there. That's the question you're probably asking, the one everybody asks. Why didn't I? I had the locks, I had the deed. One clear no, one call to a lawyer, one refusal to answer the phone, and the whole thing collapses. I want you to know I thought about it. Constantly. I talked it through with Maureen on a night shift, because she was the only person I could say all of it to. "Just tell them no and hang up," she said. "You don't owe them a scene." "If I just say no," I told her, They hear a negotiation. They've been hearing my no as an opening bid my whole life. My mother will call the relatives and tell them I've gone cold and cruel, and I'm keeping the family out of a house that should be shared. And in 6 months, when it's time to finalize the adoption, there'll be a version of me floating around where I'm the unstable one who cut off her own parents. She did it before. She wrote it down before. Maureen was quiet. Then she said the thing that clarified everything. So you don't want to win the argument? No, I said. I want it to be over. And the only way it's ever over is if it happens once, all the way, in front of someone who can't be talked around. If they come, and they do the thing, in front of the right witness, then there's no version of it later. There's just what happened. That was the plan, such as it was. Not a trap, a witness. I wasn't going to stop them from coming. I was going to let them come, all the way, on the one morning when the one person in the world whose job was to see the truth would already be standing in my living room. So when the calls came the night I moved in, I didn't fight. I said 10 is perfect, because 10 o'clock was already spoken for. The county's word came through a woman named Diane Prescott. Diane had been doing kinship placements for a long time. She had the manner of a person who has heard every version of every story and has become very difficult to lie to. She came to the condo first, and then to the beach house, and she went through my life the way the process requires: the bank statements, the references, the childhood, the health, the long, careful conversations where she was really asking one question a dozen different ways. Are you the safe choice for 2 children who have already lost everything? She asked me hard things. She asked why I hadn't pursued adoption years earlier, if I'd wanted children so badly. That one took me a minute. I told her the truth, that I'd tried once, with a family member, and it hadn't worked out, and that I'd carry that for the rest of my life. She wrote something down and moved on, but I could tell she'd filed it, the way she filed everything to come back to. I welcomed all of it, but I knew what was sitting in the file. Somewhere in a county record was a document that said Vicky Williams is unstable and cannot raise a child, with my mother's signature at the bottom, and I knew that a home study which turned that up on its own would be a very different thing than one where I'd handed it over first. So at one of our last meetings before the final visit, when Diane asked whether there was anything in the family that might complicate the placement, anyone who might interfere, I didn't hedge. I put the folded document on the table between us, the one from 2012, my mother's handwriting, gone yellow at the creases. You should know who my parents are, I said. And you should know what they did the last time I tried to take in a child from this same family. If they show up while you're here, I want you to see exactly who they are. I'm done hiding it. Diane read it twice. She didn't say much. She never says much, but she asked if she could keep a copy for the file, and I said yes. That yes turned out to be one of the most important decisions in this whole story, though it didn't feel like strategy when I made it. It felt like finally setting something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. That was a Wednesday. The voicemail came the following week, the night I moved into the house for real. My mother's 4 seconds. My father's sentence about a childless woman and 4 wasteful bedrooms. My sister's truck at 10. Here's what none of them knew. The final home visit, the last box to check before the county could approve placing Lily and Owen with me, was already on the calendar. Diane was coming to the beach house at 10 o'clock the next morning. It had been scheduled for a week. And then my sister texted a moving truck for the exact same hour and told me not to make it awkward, and I sat in my new kitchen and understood that the 2 most important appointments of my life had been booked for the same 10 o'clock by 2 sets of people who wanted opposite things from the same 4 bedrooms. They wanted a witness for their moving day. They were going to get one, just not theirs. I opened Ruth's envelope that night. I'd been avoiding it since I unpacked the box, the way you avoid a voice you miss. Inside was a short letter in her careful, shaking hand, written a few years before she died. Most of it was a grandmother's ordinary. Be well, eat something, call your old grandmother. But near the end there was a line she'd underlined once, lightly, the way she underlined the things she actually wanted you to hear. A house isn't for the loudest child, she'd written. It's for the one who comes back. She wrote that before I knew who I'd be coming back for. I read it 3 times. Then I went down the hall, and I hung the two little signs on the doors. Lily on the left, Owen on the right. And on Owen's door I taped a drawing he'd made me during a visit, a crayon house with 4 windows and 2 stick children out front, and a woman drawn too tall for the scale, standing in the doorway with a line for a smile. Then I went to bed in a house that 2 different groups of people were coming to claim in the morning, and strangely, I slept. At 9:45 the next morning, Diane's car pulled into my driveway. At 9:55, so did a moving truck. I'd made a full pot of coffee and set out 2 mugs, because a home visit is a home visit and I wanted mine to look like exactly what it was, a calm house, ready for children. Diane arrived early, as she'd said she would, and we walked through it together, room by room, and she wrote her quiet notes. She checked the smoke detectors, and the water temperature, and the cabinet where I kept the cleaning supplies, up high, latched. When we reached the 2 rooms at the end of the hall, she stopped for a moment at the signs on the doors and at Owen's crayon house, and she didn't say anything, which from Diane is its own kind of saying something. We were standing in the living room, coffee going cold in the 2 mugs, when I heard the engine downshift out on the street. A big diesel sound, wrong for a residential road on a weekday morning. I went to the window. The truck was white with green lettering, Piedmont Moving and Storage. Behind it, my father's sedan. They'd driven 155 miles from Raleigh, close to 3 hours, leaving before dawn to make a 10 o'clock they'd announced like a scheduled delivery. It was 9:55. They were early. My family is always early when they think they're taking something. I set my mug down on the sill. "They're here," I said. Diane looked at me, then at the window, then back at me. She's a professional. She didn't ask a single question. She simply stepped to the side of the room, over by the bookshelf, out of the direct line of the front door, and she opened her folder to a clean page. She'd told me on the phone she'd rather observe than intervene unless a child was in danger, and there were no children in the house that morning. That was the one mercy in the whole thing. Whatever was about to happen would happen in front of a witness whose entire job was to see clearly and write it down. My mother didn't knock. Of course she didn't. You don't knock on a door you've decided is yours. The front door opened, and she walked into my living room like she was returning to a house she'd left the day before. My father came behind her, slower, already scanning for a place to sit down. Kristen was on her phone. Behind Kristen came Todd, carrying a folded moving blanket over one arm, looking like a man who'd lost an argument in the car. And behind Todd came 2 men in Piedmont polo shirts, wheeling hand trucks and carrying a stack of flattened boxes. My mother looked around the room, at the furniture I'd chosen, the art I'd hung, the whole life I'd built without her permission. And she did the thing that told me exactly how the morning was going to go. She didn't greet me. She spoke to the movers. "The big bedroom's at the end of the hall," she said, pointing past me as if I were part of the furniture. "Start there. Everything in it goes out to the garage. My daughter's bringing her family in this weekend and she'll want that room set up first." She never once asked who the woman by the bookshelf was. Diane could have been a friend, a neighbor, a realtor, a stranger off the beach. My mother didn't have the curiosity, because in her world the only people who mattered were the ones she already knew how to manage. For a moment it actually began. That's the part I need you to understand, because it's the part that makes all of it real, and not a story anybody can soften later. My father lowered himself the rest of the way into my armchair and picked up the remote off my side table, out of pure habit, as if he'd sat in that chair 1,000 times. My mother walked to my front windows and adjusted the blinds to her liking, the way you do in a room you've decided is yours. And one of the movers, taking her at her word, wheeled his hand truck to the mouth of the hallway and started toward the master bedroom to begin. They weren't bluffing. There was a real truck in my driveway with a real ramp already down, and real men in real uniforms who had really been paid to carry my life out to the garage so my sister could have my bed. Nobody was joking. Nobody thought this was a negotiation. They had driven 3 hours in the dark fully intending to do it, and for about 10 seconds, they were doing it. One of the movers glanced at me. He'd clocked. The way people who move furniture for a living learn to clock a room. that the woman standing calmly in the center of it was not acting like someone being evicted from her own home. He slowed down. "Ma'am?" he said. To me, not to her. Before I could answer, Kristen brushed past him and started down the hall toward the two rooms with the little signs, already deciding which one was whose. She'd been inside my house for 90 seconds. My mother had raised her thoroughly. Kristen reached the first door, the one with Owen's crayon house taped to it, and she took in the little wooden sign, and the drawing, and the star lamp glowing through the gap at the bottom, and she made a face I'd seen my entire life. The face of a person encountering an inconvenience that has no right to exist. "What is all this?" she said, half to herself. Then, over her shoulder to the movers. "Whatever this is, it goes. Toss it in the garage." She reached up and put her hand on Owen's drawing to peel it off the door. I crossed the room. I didn't run. I want you to understand that. I walked the way you walk toward a stove when a pot is about to boil over, quick and exact, and I heard my own voice come out lower and steadier than I felt. "Take your hand off my children's door." The word landed in this room and stopped everything. Children. Kristen's hand came off the drawing. My father, halfway into an armchair, stayed halfway. Even the movers went still. For a second, all I could hear was the ocean coming through the open window, that slow, patient breath, in and out. And then my mother laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, disbelieving one. The wrong laugh entirely, the laugh of a woman certain she's just caught you in a lie. "Your children," she said. "Vicky, you don't have children. That's the whole point. That's why we're here." I let the laugh sit in the room until it went sour. "Their mother was Amanda," I said. "Carol's Amanda, the one you erased." The name did something to the air. My father's face changed first. A slow drop, the look of a man who's just understood that the noise he's been hearing in the walls is the foundation. Kristen looked between me and our parents, lost, because Kristen had been young enough when they buried that name that she'd half forgotten it had ever belonged to a person. "That's," she started, "that's not our problem." And there it was. The exact sentence my father had said when Amanda died. It came out of my sister's mouth without her knowing where she'd learned it, and I watched her hear herself say it, and I watched her not yet understand why the room had gotten colder. "You said that already," I told her. Or he did, in October, when their mother died on a wet road and left two children with no one, and nobody in this family even asked their names. I looked at my mother. I asked. I'm the only one who ever asks. My mother recovered fast. She always does. "This is very sad," she said, sliding into the cardigan voice, the concerned one. "But it has nothing to do with this house, and you can't just take on two strange children on a whim. You're not—" She paused, choosing the old word with care. "You're not in a position for that." I reached into the folder on the side table. I'd set it there that morning, next to the coffee, the way you lay out anything you might need. I took out the document, unfolded it along its old creases, and held it up so the room could see the handwriting. "You told a caseworker I was unstable," I said. "In 2012, when I tried to take Amanda in, and you decided you'd rather see her go to strangers than watch me connect myself to Carol's side of the family. You wrote it down, you signed it, you said the family would handle it, and then you didn't, and Amanda aged out alone, and now she's dead, and her children are in the system." I let it hang. "And you drove 3 hours this morning to take the rooms I made for them." My mother's mouth opened, and nothing came out. My father had stopped pretending to sit. He was standing now, one hand gripping the back of the chair, staring at the paper like it might rewrite itself if he looked hard enough. She tried once to turn the room back around. My mother is nothing if not a professional. "You could have told us," she said. And there it was, the pivot, the making of herself into the wronged party. "You let us drive all the way out here. You planned this. That's a cruel thing to do to your parents, Vicky. That's not the daughter I raised." "You're right," I said. "It isn't. The daughter you raised would have packed the master bedroom." My mother tried the only move she had left, which was money, because in my family, money was how you turned a wrong into a transaction. "Fine," she said, and I could hear her recalibrating, hunting for the version where she still walked out ahead. "If the house means that much to you, we'll talk about what's fair. Your father and I put a lot into this family over the years. There are ways to make everyone whole. We don't have to do this in front of a stranger. She said stranger with a glance at Diane, testing whether the witness could be made to feel unwelcome enough to look away. There's no hole to make, I said. You didn't put anything into this house. You drove 3 hours to take it. And she's not a stranger. She's the only person in this room whose job is to tell the truth about what happens to children. Kristen had gone very quiet. She was looking down the hall at the two little doors, and I watched something move across her face that wasn't quite shame, but was in the same family as it. You really have kids coming, she said slowly, like she was hearing the whole morning again from the beginning. Amanda's kids. For just a second she wasn't the woman who'd reached for the drawing. She was a mother, and she was doing the arithmetic of 2 children with no one, and it was landing somewhere our parents' faces never let anything land. Diane spoke for the first time, from over by the bookshelf. She didn't raise her voice. She never has to. I have a copy of that statement in Ms. Williams's file, she said. It's part of her record. My mother turned, seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time since she'd walked in. And who exactly are you? I'm Ms. Prescott, Diane said. I'm here for Vicky's home study. I've seen everything I need to. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when powerful people realize the room isn't theirs. It's not loud, it's almost quiet. My mother's power in our family had always rested on one thing, that no outsider was ever watching when she did the managing. She could be reasonable in public and ruthless in private because the private never left the room. And now the private had left the room. It was in a file. It was in a stranger's notes. It was standing by my bookshelf with a pen and a clear line of sight. I watched her recalculate in real time. I watched her understand that the 2 10 o'clock appointments had never been 2 appointments at all. That 10 is perfect had not been surrender. That I'd let them come precisely because someone would be standing here to see them do it, someone they could never talk around afterward. Ruth's letter was still in the folder. I took it out too, because if we were going to do this, we were going to do all of it. Your mother left me some money when she died, I said to mine. Not much. You've thrown it in my face for years like it was stolen from you. But she left me something else and I never showed you, because you'd have found a way to take that too. I read the line out loud. A house isn't for the loudest child, it's for the one who comes back. I set the letter on the table beside the statement, side by side. My grandmother's handwriting and my mother's, 2 women from the same family, saying 2 completely different things about what love is for. She knew which one of us that would be, I said. She was right. My father made a sound then. Not a word. Just a small broken exhale, the sound a man makes when a thing he's held shut for 30 years finally gives. He'd been the one who said we don't talk about that side of the family. He'd said it about his own wife's sister, about Carol, about Amanda, reaching for the remote every time. And now he was standing in my living room, hearing his own mother-in-law's handwriting tell him what the family was actually for, and there was no remote for that. Joyce, he said quietly, to my mother. And it wasn't a defense of her. It was the opposite. It was a man asking his wife to stop, because he'd finally seen the size of what they'd done, and he couldn't watch her keep doing it in a stranger's presence. My mother didn't stop. She never knows how. But my father had, and that mattered, because he was the one who'd always let her. That was the moment Todd put the box down. I'd almost forgotten he was there. He'd been standing near the door the whole time, holding a stack of flattened cardboard, my sister's husband, a man I'd never known well and never disliked. He set the boxes on the floor, carefully, as if they were heavier than they were. I'm not carrying one more thing out of a kid's room, he said. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Kristen. I told you this was wrong in the car. Kristen, I'll be outside. He walked out. A minute later, I heard a car door close in the driveway, and the sound of it did more to my sister's face than anything I'd said. Because I was the outsider she'd been raised to discount. Todd was the inside. Todd was her real family, the phrase my mother wielded like a deed. And Todd had just walked out of my house and left her standing in a hallway she had no right to be in. The movers were already retreating, murmuring something about not getting involved in family disputes, folding their hand trucks, glad to be leaving. Professionals know when a job has stopped being a job. I heard the older one say to the younger, low, on his way out the door, "We don't move anybody out of their own house." And that was the last of the moving crew my family had hired to take my children's rooms. My mother tried one more time to find the version of the morning in which she was still in charge. "We're your family, Vicky," she said. "You'll regret cutting us off." I walked to the front door and opened it, which is the most polite way I know to end a conversation. "You cut her off first," I said. "In 2012. I'm just the last one still standing where you left her." They left the way people leave when there's nothing left to take. Kristen went without a word, her phone finally dark in her hand. My father was last. He stopped in the doorway, and for a moment I thought he might say something that mattered, and then he didn't, and they were gone. The sedan first, the empty truck grinding along behind it, and the diesel sound faded down the street until it was just the ocean again. My neighbor from 2 doors down was out in her yard with a hose, and she'd stopped watering to watch a moving truck arrive and leave a house without moving a single thing. 4 people go in confident and come out quiet. A woman follow them to the door and not raise her voice once. She caught my eye across the street and gave me a small look, the look one woman gives another when she's understood the shape of a thing without needing the details. I lifted a hand. She lifted hers. It's a small town. People see what happens on a street at 10 in the morning, and what they saw was not the story my parents had packed into the car with them. Diane closed her folder. "I'll write this up today," she said. "For the record, nothing this morning hurt your case. If anything, it clarified it." She paused at the door, and her professional face softened by exactly 1 degree. "You built a good home here." Then she was gone too, and the house was mine again, and for a few minutes I just stood in the middle of the living room, where all of it had happened, and let it be quiet. I picked up the 2 coffee mugs, still full, gone cold. I put Ruth's letter and my mother's statement back in the folder, side by side, and closed it. I walked down the hall and stood in front of the 2 doors, and this time I opened them, both of them, and looked at the rooms I'd made, the star lamp and the window seat, waiting. Nobody had taken anything. Everything I'd built was still standing. I think that was the moment it actually reached me, not as a victory, but as a fact, the way solid ground reaches you after you've been bracing for a fall that doesn't come. They had come to empty my house, and my house was full, and it was going to stay that way. The tire tracks. The truck pressed into the sand at the edge of my driveway, stayed there for 2 days, until the rain took them. I looked at them more than once. They were the only evidence outside that any of it had happened. Everything that mattered had happened inside, in a file, in a folder, in 2 rooms at the end of a hall. My phone lit up before the truck reached the highway. Not from my parents, from the relatives. Word travels fast in a family that spent 30 years pretending certain things never happened, and it turned out my parents had spent that same drive telling anyone who'd listen a story they'd built in advance. In their version, they were the selfless ones, graciously helping poor, lonely Vicky downsize into a life more suitable for a single woman with too much house and no one to fill it. That was the frame they'd made before they ever got in the car. Generous parents, ungrateful daughter, 4 wasteful bedrooms. The problem with building a frame in advance is that it only holds the picture you expected. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years called first, then a cousin. The story that reached them wasn't the one my parents had sent out. It was the other one, the true one, moving through the family in the opposite direction, because the movers talk, and Todd talks, and a caseworker standing in the living room is the kind of detail that turns a rumor into a fact overnight. By that evening, the version everyone had was this. Joyce and Dennis drove 3 hours to throw their childless daughter out of her own house so Kristen could have it, and it turned out the childless daughter was in the middle of taking in the grandchildren the whole family had abandoned, and there was a social worker standing right there when they tried it. You cannot manage a story like that. There is no Cardigan voice for it. I didn't gloat. I also didn't stop it, and I want to be honest about that. When the aunt called, crying a little, asking why no one had told her about Amanda's children, I told her the plain truth. No one had told her because no one wanted her to know, and the not knowing had a cost, and the cost was 2 kids sitting in the system for months, while a family that talks constantly about family said nothing. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was time somebody in that family heard a true sentence spoken plainly. It changed things. In the quiet way these things change. My parents had spent decades as the couple at the center of every family occasion, the ones who hosted, who decided, who were deferred to. That kind of authority runs entirely on reputation, and reputation is exactly what they lost that week. The relatives didn't hold a meeting or make a declaration. They just started calling me instead of them. They started asking about Lily and Owen by name. My mother went from being the woman everyone consulted to the woman everyone talked about. And for someone who had spent her whole life managing the story, being the story was the one punishment she had no tool for. My parents didn't get exposed in some dramatic reckoning. They just quietly stopped being believed, which for them was worse. Kristen sent one message, 2 weeks after. Not an apology. Kristen doesn't have those. It said, "I didn't know about the kids. Mom didn't tell me the whole thing." I looked at it for a while, sitting on my new porch with the ocean going. And I thought about all the years my sister never once had to know the whole thing before she took what she wanted. I didn't write back that night. I'm still deciding whether I will. Some doors you leave closed, not out of cruelty, but because you finally understand they were never really open. My father came back 3 days after the morning, alone. I didn't call first. He just appeared in my driveway one afternoon, an old man standing next to his car, unsure whether he was allowed to walk up to the house. I went out to him because I didn't want him inside. We stood on the front walk with the ocean going behind us, and he held something in his hand, and when he opened it, I saw it was Owen's crayon drawing, the one Kristen had reached for. It must have come loose in the commotion and ended up in his coat pocket. He'd driven 3 hours to give it back, or to have a reason to come. I never decided which, and it doesn't matter. "I should have let you take her," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the drawing. In 2012, "I should have let you take Amanda." There are apologies that ask for something, and apologies that don't. This one didn't, which was the only reason I could stand to hear it. I didn't rush to make him feel better. I'd spent 30 years making them feel better, and I'd finally run out. "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded slowly, like the word had landed somewhere it needed to reach. He set the drawing on the hood of his car, smoothed it flat with one big careful hand, and left it there for me. Then he got in and drove away, and I let him, because a man understanding the truth 12 years late is still 12 years late, and I had 2 children to think about who couldn't afford my forgiveness to cost them anything. I picked the drawing up off the car hood after he was gone. The tape had lost its grip. I found a fresh piece in the kitchen drawer and put it back on Owen's door where it belonged. That was the fallout. Not a courtroom, not handcuffs, not one job lost or one marriage announced over, though I heard later, quietly, that Todd had gotten his own place and that he and Kristen were figuring things out, which is what people say when the figuring is mostly done. The consequence was smaller than a scandal and, in its way, larger. My parents had spent 30 years telling a story about who I was, and in one morning, in front of the one witness who couldn't be managed, that story stopped being theirs to tell. They lost the only thing they'd ever really had over me. They lost the telling of it. I deleted the family group chat that night. Not in anger. It had simply stopped being a place I lived. In its place I made a new one, with 2 names in it, Lily and Owen, even though neither of them had a phone and wouldn't for years. I just wanted to see the 2 names sitting together on a screen. 2 weeks later, Diane called with a sentence I'd been waiting 11 years to hear without knowing it. "The county approved the placement," she said. "Nothing that morning hurt your case. It made it stronger. You can bring them home whenever you're ready." I understood, standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, that this wasn't the end of anything official. Adoption is slow. There would be more visits, more months, a court date late in the year, a judge, a final decree with all our names on it. This was the beginning of the part that actually mattered, not the end of the paperwork. but it was the part I'd built the whole house for. It was the part where they came home. "I'm ready," I said. "I've been ready since January." I told the kids at our next visit, the two of us on one side of a low table and Lily on the other with Owen leaning into her the way he always did. I'd rehearsed it a dozen ways, and in the end I just said it plainly, because Lily could smell a rehearsed thing from across a room. I told them the county had said yes, that they were going to come live with me, in the house by the water, in the 2 rooms with their names on the doors. That it wasn't a visit this time, that it was for keeps. Owen understood the good part immediately and asked if the star lamp was really his. But Lily didn't move. She looked at me for a long moment with that careful, exit-watching face, and then she asked the only question that mattered to a kid who'd been moved as many times as she had. For how long? Not out of hope. Out of the opposite of hope. She was asking so she'd know how much of herself it was safe to unpack. "For the rest of it," I said. "For as long as there's a me. Those are your rooms now. Nobody's taking them. I promise you that. And I don't make promises I can't keep." She didn't cry, and she didn't hug me, and I didn't ask her to. She just nodded, once, the way you nod when you've decided to risk believing something, and she reached over and straightened the collar of Owen's shirt, taking care of him the way she'd always had to. But that night, the caseworker told me later, Lily asked whether she could bring the library book to the new house, and whether there'd be a shelf for it. She was already, quietly, deciding to stay. They moved in on a Saturday near the end of May. It didn't look the way a moving day is supposed to look. There was no truck. There were 2 small backpacks, a garbage bag of clothes that broke something in me, a library book that would have to go back eventually, and 2 children standing in my driveway looking up at a house that was about to be theirs, not sure yet whether they were allowed to want it. Lily held Owen's hand. She'd been doing that, I'd learn, since the night their mother didn't come home. 8 years old and already the strong one. I recognized it instantly, the way you recognize your own handwriting on an old envelope you forgot you'd sent. "Is this it?" she asked. Not rude, careful. A kid who'd learned not to assume good news was ever meant for her. "This is it," I said. And I opened the door and let them walk into a house that a woman with no one had built for exactly this. That first night, the house was fuller than it had ever been and quieter than I expected. 2 pairs of small shoes by the door. The smell of paint finally gone, replaced by whatever it is children carry with them, which is mostly just warmth. I made grilled cheese, because it was the only dinner I was sure they'd both eat. And Owen ate his in the same careful, deliberate way he did everything. And Lily watched me the whole meal like she was memorizing where the doors were, and slowly, over the course of an hour, stopped. When it was time for bed, I walked them down the hall to the 2 rooms with the signs on the doors. Lily on the left, Owen on the right. Owen stood in his doorway and looked at the star lamp and the small bed and the crayon house taped back up where I'd found it, and he didn't say anything, which from Owen was a whole speech. Then Lily asked the question that undid me. "Does somebody read a book before bed here?" she said. "Our mom used to, before." I went to the shelf where I'd put my grandmother's things, and I took down the book with the lighthouse on the cover, so worn the corners had gone soft as cloth. I sat on the edge of Owen's bed, and Lily came and sat on the other side, close but not touching, the way she did everything, and I opened it. Owen reached out and put one finger on the lighthouse on the cover. "Did somebody read this to you?" he asked. "My grandmother did," I said, "when I was small. She read it to me twice, which was more than she read anything." I turned to the first page, where the spine had gone soft from opening. "And I read it to your mom, when she was about Lily's age. She loved the lighthouse, the little one." Lily's head came up at that. "You knew our mom?" "I did," I said. "She was my cousin. I loved her very much. And I looked for you 2 for a long time before I found you." I don't know how much of it they understood that night. Not the years, not the file, not the truck in the driveway. Children don't need the whole story. They need one true thing they can hold on to, and the true thing was this. Somebody in this family had always been trying to reach them, and now she finally had. I read them the book. It's a simple story. A little lighthouse that's sure it's too small to matter. that keeps its light burning through a storm for boats. It will never meet until morning comes and it learns that the whole point was the light, not the size. My grandmother read it to me in a house that never had enough room for a girl on the edge of the frame. I read it to Amanda in the years before the family let her disappear. And I read it to Amanda's children in a house I bought with 11 years of my own money, in a bedroom my mother had tried to give away, while the real lighthouse out past the second row of houses swept its beam across the water and, for the first time, caught the corner of the window. Owen saw it. He pointed, his finger against the glass. "There's a real one," he whispered, like it was a secret between us. "There is," I said. "You can see it from your bed." They fell asleep before the storm and the book was over. Both of them, curled in Owen's little bed, Lily's hand still loosely around her brother's wrist even in sleep. I sat there longer than I needed to. Then I stood, and I turned off the star lamp, and I went to the door. The first weeks weren't a fairy tale, and I wouldn't want to tell you they were. Lily tested me the way a kid tests a bridge before trusting it with her weight. She'd ask for things and then flinch, waiting for the catch, for the version of an adult who says yes, and then makes you pay for having wanted it. For a while, she wouldn't ask for anything at all. Then one evening, 3 weeks in, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said, in a small, careful voice, "Can I have the blue cup? The one with the boat?" It was such a tiny thing. A cup. But she'd chosen it, and she'd asked, and she'd let herself want something out loud in my house. And I had to turn to the sink for a second so she wouldn't see what it did to me. I gave her the blue cup. She used it every day after that. It's still the only cup she'll drink from. Owen slept with the star lamp on for a month, and then one morning I realized he'd turned it off himself the night before and slept the whole night through, and hadn't come to find me at 3 in the morning to check that the house was still there. Small things. A parent-teacher meeting where the kindergarten teacher told me Owen had drawn a picture of his house with 4 windows and made sure to tell the class which windows were whose. Lily laughed at something on television, really laughed, the unguarded kind, and then looked surprised at herself, like she'd forgotten she was allowed. I collected those moments the way I'd once collected paychecks, quietly, into an account I'd never touch, except this time I knew exactly what I'd been saving for. The mornings now have a shape. Owen wakes first and comes to find me, and we stand at the kitchen window while the tide goes out, and I've hung Ruth's tide clock on the wall so he can watch the little hand track the water he can already see. Lily sleeps later than she used to, which the therapist says is a good sign, a body finally deciding it's safe to rest. On the counter there's a school calendar with 2 names on it now. The house sounds like something it never sounded like before. For most of my life, the doors in my family stayed closed. Rooms you weren't invited into, names you didn't say, a frame you stood at the edge of, holding the camera while everyone else got arranged in the center. My whole childhood was learning which doors were shut to the strong one who could obviously manage without. I left both of these open, Lily on the left, Owen on the right. Down the hall, the ocean kept up its slow, patient breathing, in and out, and the light came around again across the water and touched the wall and moved on. They called me childless. For years they used the word like a verdict, like a smaller category of person, like a reason my whole life could be handed to someone with a real family. They were so certain it meant empty. They were just early. I never needed to close those doors again.